This framework explores consciousness as a dynamic, emergent property of complex systems, driven by the system's intrinsic tendency toward equilibrium. It posits that as systems evolve and become more complex, they encounter situations that disrupt the balance established by their existing logical structures. To restore equilibrium, these systems are compelled to adopt progressively higher levels of logical organization, leading to increasingly sophisticated forms of consciousness. At the heart of this framework is the concept of triads, groups of three interrelated elements that interact according to specific patterns. These triads represent the fundamental units of interaction within a system, with each pattern reflecting a different way in which the system maintains balance. The progression of consciousness begins with simple equivalence, where elements are balanced in a straightforward manner, and then moves through more complex patterns such as reinforcement, causation, and beyond. As systems encounter challenges that disrupt their existing equilibrium, they are pushed to reorganize their internal relationships using the next higher logical structure. This creates a progression where mental processes develop and become more complex over time. Each new level of complexity requires the system to integrate more sophisticated interactions, enhancing its capacity for self-regulation and equilibrium. This progression is driven by both biological factors and experiential learning as the system adapts to its environment. In this context, the development of consciousness is seen as a gradual ascent through these levels of complexity. As systems integrate higher-order triads and manage increasingly intricate relationships, they become more self-aware. The human brain, capable of navigating all these levels, exemplifies this process of conscious evolution. When a system can internally contemplate and understand these patterns, it becomes capable of recognizing and applying them in response to external experiences. This progressive framework aligns with Carl Friston's free energy principle, which posits that systems act to minimize free energy or surprise by reducing the discrepancy between their predictions and actual sensory inputs. As systems advance through more complex levels of logical organization, they become increasingly adept at managing these discrepancies, thus maintaining equilibrium and enhancing their conscious awareness. The following sections explore specific triads and their corresponding patterns, illustrating how consciousness emerges and evolves through this progressive process. Each level represents a step in the journey toward greater self-awareness as systems refine their ability to maintain balance and adapt to their environment, ultimately leading to a fully integrated and conscious mind. Coexistence, symbiotic consciousness. At the foundational level, consciousness emerges from the mutual coexistence of elements. Here, the system's basic drive is to maintain balance through simple equivalence. Each element supports and stabilizes the others in a straightforward, interdependent relationship. This form of consciousness reflects an early stage where awareness is rooted in maintaining simple, mutually reinforcing connections. Disruptions at this level push the system to recognize and reinforce these relationships, preparing it for more complex interactions. Equilibrium, balanced consciousness. Consciousness here involves the system's ability to maintain balance by harmonizing the presence and absence of certain elements. This stage reflects a conscious awareness of the need to balance competing forces to sustain stability. When faced with disruptions, the system learns to modulate these forces more carefully, enhancing its capacity to maintain equilibrium through a refined sense of balance. Reinforcement, cascading consciousness. As consciousness evolves, it begins to recognize the cascading effects of interactions. In this stage, the system maintains equilibrium by reinforcing connections where the activation of one element triggers a supportive reaction in others. Disruptions that challenge these connections push the system to develop a deeper understanding of how actions and reactions are linked, leading to a more dynamic and interconnected form of consciousness. Feedback, inhibitory consciousness. Consciousness now involves understanding and managing inhibitory feedback loops. The system learns to maintain stability by recognizing that the absence or inhibition of certain elements can prevent instability in others. This stage reflects a growing awareness of the need to regulate and control interactions to avoid disruptions, leading to a more nuanced form of self-regulation and conscious control. Causal consciousness. Consciousness at this level becomes more sophisticated as it navigates linear cause and effect relationships. The system stabilizes itself by understanding and predicting the consequences of its actions. When faced with disruptions that defy simple causality, the system is pushed to refine its reasoning, paving the way for more complex forms of understanding and a more deterministic approach to consciousness. Reversive consciousness. Here, consciousness develops the capacity to revert to previous states to restore equilibrium. This stage reflects an adaptive consciousness that can cycle through different states to find stability. Disruptions that prevent easy reversions push the system to explore alternative paths, fostering a consciousness that is more resilient and flexible in its approach to maintaining balance. Nonlinear consciousness. Consciousness becomes significantly more complex as it begins to recognize and navigate nonlinear relationships. The system learns that not all interactions follow a straightforward path, requiring a more sophisticated approach to maintain equilibrium. Disruptions at this level encourage the system to embrace complexity and uncertainty, leading to a consciousness that is adept at managing intricate and sometimes unpredictable influences. Retrospective consciousness. At this stage, consciousness involves looking back at past outcomes to inform current decisions. The system maintains stability by retrospectively adjusting its internal states based on previous experiences. Disruptions that challenge the reliability of past patterns push the system to develop a more critical and reflective consciousness, capable of learning from history to better navigate the present. Inclusive consciousness. At this level, consciousness arises through understanding multiple causes, giving rise to the third element of a system, and thus understanding of the unified whole. By minimizing surprise across multiple influences, the system achieves a more comprehensive form of equilibrium. This inclusive approach represents a more complex form of consciousness that coordinates multiple elements to sustain stability. Exclusive consciousness. Exclusive consciousness emerges when the system realizes that certain elements, when absent, help stabilize the whole. The absence of one element can prevent destabilizing influences from affecting others. This form of consciousness is selective, manifesting in the system's ability to consciously exclude or isolate elements that could lead to instability, thereby maintaining equilibrium by refining and focusing on the most stable configurations. Conjoined consciousness. Conjoined consciousness arises when the system achieves stability by tightly integrating multiple elements that must interact simultaneously. Here, the central element serves as a hub, connecting and balancing the influences of both the first and third. The system must carefully manage these interactions to maintain equilibrium, reflecting a more complex consciousness that recognizes the necessity of simultaneous interdependent relationships. This manifests in the system's ability to sustain harmony among multiple interacting forces, creating a unified, balanced state. Bottlenecked consciousness. Bottlenecked consciousness occurs when the system identifies critical constraints where the absence of one element can prevent the functioning of others. If the central element is absent or lessened, it restricts both others, creating a bottleneck that restricts the system's ability to maintain equilibrium. This form of consciousness manifests in the system's strategic focus on ensuring that key elements are present and aligned to overcome constraints, leading to a more deliberate and controlled approach to stability. Harmonic consciousness. Harmonic consciousness is characterized by the system's ability to achieve equilibrium through harmonious interactions among its elements. When any two elements are present together, they naturally lead to the emergence of the third, creating a balance and reinforcing cycle. This consciousness manifests as a sophisticated capacity for recognizing and fostering harmonious relationships, where the system continuously aligns its elements to produce a stable, mutually reinforcing whole. Dissonant consciousness. Dissonant consciousness emerges when the system must manage conflicting or opposing forces to achieve equilibrium. The absence of one element forces the system to balance the remaining two, even when their interactions are inherently dissonant. This form of consciousness manifests in the system's ability to navigate and reconcile tensions, maintaining stability by carefully balancing opposing influence within its structure. Convergent consciousness. Convergent consciousness arises when the system achieves stability by bringing multiple elements together into a unified state. Each element influences and reinforces the others, leading to a more integrated and cohesive equilibrium. This form of consciousness manifests as a higher level of complexity, where the system consciously manages and integrates diverse influences to achieve a strong, unified state. The system becomes adept at aligning and synthesizing multiple forces to create a more resilient and stable structure. Divergent consciousness. Divergent consciousness occurs when the system recognizes that the absence of one element can lead to the independent development of others. The absence of a pair of elements allows the remaining element to stabilize and function independently. This consciousness manifests as the system's ability to manage and sustain stability by allowing subsystems to diverge and develop autonomously. The system becomes more flexible and adaptive, capable of maintaining overall coherence while supporting the independent evolution of its parts. Combinatorial consciousness. Combinatorial consciousness arises when the system explores different combinations of elements to find the most stable configuration. The presence of any two elements can either facilitate or hinder the emergence of the third, depending on how they are combined. This form of consciousness manifests in the system's capacity to experiment with and optimize various configurations, ensuring that the most effective and balanced states are achieved. The system becomes more dynamic and creative in its approach to equilibrium. Divisional consciousness. Divisional consciousness emerges when the system achieves stability by allowing elements to function independently, dividing into distinct subsystems. The absence of a pair of elements allows the remaining element to emerge as an autonomous subsystem. This consciousness manifests in the system's ability to maintain stability through the separation and specialization of its components, leading to a more complex and diversified structure where different parts operate independently while contributing to the whole. Associative consciousness. Associative consciousness arises when the system understands how specific combinations of elements lead to particular outcomes. The presence of specific pairings directly influences the stabilization of the third element. This form of consciousness manifests in the system's ability to recognize and leverage the associations between elements, ensuring that the system achieves equilibrium through intentional and strategic combinations. The system becomes more skilled at managing relationships to create desired outcomes. Disassociative consciousness. Disassociative consciousness occurs when the system recognizes that breaking certain associations can lead to new and stable configurations. The absence of specific combinations allows the remaining elements to reconfigure themselves into a new, stable state. This form of consciousness manifests in the system's ability to disassociate and reconfigure elements to explore alternative pathways to stability, showing adaptability and innovation in maintaining equilibrium. Integrative consciousness. Integrative consciousness represents the highest level of conscious emergence, where the system fully integrates its elements into a cohesive and unified whole. The presence of all elements leads to a stable, well-functioning system where each part reinforces the others. This consciousness manifests as a profound capacity for unity and coherence, where the system achieves equilibrium through complete integration, reflecting a deep understanding of how all components must work together in harmony. Disintegrative consciousness. Finally, disintegrative consciousness arises when the system manages equilibrium through the intentional disintegration of its elements. The absence of integration allows the system to break down into distinct subsystems, each functioning independently. This form of consciousness manifests in the system's ability to recognize when disintegration is necessary for stability, allowing it to reorganize and reconstitute itself in new, adaptive ways. The system becomes capable of transformation and renewal, maintaining overall coherence while allowing for the evolution of its parts. This introduction aims to provide a detailed, theoretical foundation for understanding consciousness as the drive toward equilibrium supported by the free energy principle. Each triad then represents a different form of conscious emergence, illustrating how systems become increasingly sophisticated in their ability to maintain stability as they incorporate more complex interactions. Understanding consciousness as an emergent property of complex systems offers profound insights into personal growth and the understanding of others. This framework, which describes the progression from simple to complex forms of consciousness through increasingly sophisticated patterns of equilibrium, can be applied to both self-development and interpersonal relationships. On a personal level, recognizing that consciousness evolves through progressively complex patterns of interaction allows individuals to approach their own mental and emotional development with greater intentionality. By understanding that challenges and disruptions in life are not just obstacles but opportunities to evolve to a higher level of conscious awareness, one can actively engage in this progression. When faced with situations that disrupt your internal balance, whether in the form of stress, uncertainty, or conflict, this framework encourages you to seek new ways of understanding and reorganizing your thoughts and behaviors. Rather than reverting to simpler, less effective patterns, you can strive to adopt more sophisticated approaches that incorporate higher order thinking, such as causation, reinforcement, and integration. For instance, when dealing with a complex problem, you might initially approach it with basic reasoning, equivalence, or simple cause and effect. As you encounter challenges that cannot be resolved with these methods, the framework suggests progressing to more complex strategies, such as understanding feedback loops, considering non-linear relationships, or integrating multiple perspectives. This progression not only helps in resolving the immediate issue, but also contributes to your overall conscious development, making you more adaptable, self-aware, and resilient. This framework also provides a powerful tool for understanding others. Recognizing that each person operates at different levels of consciousness depending on their experiences, knowledge, and mental development allows for greater empathy and more effective communication. By understanding where someone might be in their own progression, you can tailor your interactions to better meet them where they are, fostering more meaningful connections. Ultimately, applying this framework to both personal and interpersonal contexts encourages a life of continuous growth and conscious evolution. By understanding the natural progression of consciousness, you can actively engage in your own development, embracing complexity and change as pathways to greater self-awareness. At the same time, this understanding fosters deeper empathy and connection with others, allowing you to support and inspire their growth as well. In a broader sense, this framework invites us all to view consciousness not as a static state, but as an ongoing process of becoming, one that is shaped by our interactions, challenges, and the way we choose to respond to them. By embracing this perspective, we can live more intentionally, continuously striving toward higher levels of equilibrium, self-awareness, and ultimately a more conscious and fulfilling existence.